Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Safer Sim webinar series. My name is Jacob Hayden, and I'm a program coordinator for Safer Sim at the University of Iowa. Safer Sim is a Tier 1 university transportation center with the research priority of promoting safety, and our webinar series features the research projects from within our center. So thanks for joining us today. As I've mentioned already a couple times, we will have time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. Attendees can use their microphone or chat box to participate once we get to that Q&A session, but during the presentation, feel free to use the chat box at any time, and we will address those comments during the Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared online after. And today's presentation features a project that's part of the cooperative research program between the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety and the SaferSim University Transportation Center. I'm pleased to welcome our presenter, Bill Horrey from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety.
Thanks very much, Jacob. It's a pleasure to be here. So, as many of you are probably wondering, why is a AAA Foundation presenter here at the Safer Sim webinar? And as Jacob alluded to, this is really part of our cooperative research program. So we're really pleased to be part of this program because it really reflects a shared commitment to traffic safety between our two organizations. So many of you are already familiar with the Safer Sim side of the house, but AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety is a nonprofit charitable organization. We're funded largely by generous contributions from the American Automobile Association, the different clubs in America and in Canada. And that's really where a lot of our operating budget comes from. But we're very pleased to be part of this cooperative research program because it really allows us to pool our expertise and resources and kind of enables kind of a larger expanded connection to safety and research stakeholders while pursuing projects of mutual interest. And over the course of the 3-year program, we've been very fortunate to have had 6 projects that are either completed or are in various phases of completion. So today I'm going to be talking about one of these projects. And this one represents a collaboration between 3 of the universities that are part of Safer Sim, as well as the foundation. So from the foundation, we have myself and Aaron Benson. We have Walter Gore and Fatima Afifa from the University of Central Florida, Kara Hammond from University of Iowa, and Kelvin Santiago from University of Wisconsin. And so we were very pleased to be able to work with all of these individuals on this project. Now, really, we're talking about new vehicle technology, that's kind of the space where this project originates. And so when you think about new vehicle technology, there's not just a lot of different systems being developed, but also there's many different visions for the future. And when I talk about new technology, I'm really talking about technology that can actively control different aspects of the vehicle. So whether it's adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, the level 2 combination of those features, if you're familiar with the SAE levels, or even the higher levels of automation. So as you get higher and higher, and the responsibilities of the driver start to become a little bit washed out, these are the sorts of technologies that we're thinking about. And of course, as safety researchers, we're often, if not always, trying to think about what all this technology means for the end user. And so to put it into somewhat of a storyline here, we know that this new vehicle technology is becoming more and more commonplace. It's becoming even a standard feature in certain vehicle makes and models. It's starting to creep down into kind of the lower, more affordable models as well. We also know that this technology has a lot of great potential to reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities. And I say that by just a reflection of, if you were to look at the crashes that are occurring on the road, the configuration of these crashes, and you map that onto the sorts of situations that this technology is really addressed to help alleviate, we do see room for significant savings and significant benefits as well. But they don't come without some drawbacks. And one of the things that's emerged over the course of the past few years in some of our own research, as well as that of others, is that because of the complexity of these systems, oftentimes drivers just don't understand these systems, whether it's how they operate or some of the limitations or constraints of these systems. We know from other research we've done recently that this understanding is important. You know, it does impact performance in certain situations. And so if you have a poor or you know, incomplete understanding of these technologies or these systems, it can lead to poor performance. And we've shown that in some studies, simulated studies and elsewhere. Another byproduct of the technology is that over time, people might become complacent while using it. And so this can lead to unsafe behaviors. Maybe they'll start to do things that behind the wheel that they're not supposed to. And it can also lead to other errors as well. And so we're really mindful of all of these unintended consequences that come with this new technology. But the story is not complete at that point. We also have to consider that drivers are not the only group that interacts with this new technology, although that's really been the large focus of a lot of the research. We have to consider other road users as well. And so bicyclists, pedestrians, and other road users are all going to interact with this technology as they navigate the road transportation system. There have been some studies that have considered other road users in terms of their perceptions and understanding of this technology. But oftentimes this is really looking at highly automated systems. So these are features where you're talking like level 4 or level 5, where the vehicles are close to self-driving or really involve limited driver inputs in normal operating conditions. So what we wanted to do with the current study was really try to get a better understanding of where people's perceptions were, their understanding, or what we sometimes call mental models, and expectations of new vehicle technology, but from the perspective of a variety of different road users. And so that really kind of creates the framework for the current study. So for this approach, we engaged in a very COVID-friendly online survey. And we issued this survey with several different blocks of questions that we were interested in tackling. So we were asking people about their demographic information. Very importantly, we were asking about their road use habits. So what kind of transportation habits do they have on a daily basis? We were interested in their access to vehicles and also to vehicles that had these sorts of technologies equipped. We asked them a series of questions about their general understanding of advanced driver assistance systems, such as adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assist. And we also asked about their expectations of technology in specific use cases. So we provided them with a couple of scenarios, which I'll talk about in greater detail in just a moment. But we were interested in their perceptions of trust and risk, as well as what they might do in these situations. And we also asked these questions from different points of view as well. So within the different scenarios, we asked from the perspective of the non-driver in the scenario, or from the driver in the scenario. We also asked some questions about the future capabilities of systems as well. And so trying to get a handle on what the outlook for these systems was. We used the responses to certain questions to classify them as either primarily a driver or primarily another road user. And of course, we're not suggesting that drivers are only drivers or bicyclists are only bicyclists, but we were trying to get a handle on what mode of transportation the person used most often over the course of a normal day. And so that's kind of really where we kind of created the groupings that we'll see a bit later on. In terms of the two scenarios that we're talking about, we had a narrative sort of approach, and so we had two short descriptions of different road situations, one involving a bicyclist and the other involving a pedestrian. And the bicyclist scenario was really kind of captured a pretty routine situation where a vehicle was approaching from a bicyclist from behind. It was a relatively narrow road, but importantly, we specified that the vehicle had the technology activated. So it was actually using a combination of adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assist. The pedestrian scenario was one in which we had a mid-block crossing. A vehicle on the far side of the road had already stopped for the pedestrian. However, there was a vehicle in the near lane that was approaching the crosswalk. And again, it had these advanced systems activated, the lane keeping assist as well as the adaptive cruise control. And we were really interested in asking a series of questions about what would happen in the situation, what they would do in different roles. So whether they were the bicyclist or the pedestrian in the scenario, or if they were the driver of the vehicle using the technology. We asked about trust, perceptions of risk, and so on. For the current presentation, I'm really going to focus on some of the data outcomes related to the bicycle scenario. However, a full complement of results is available in the full report, which is available to you all. So the survey was sent out through a variety of sources, through email solicitations and otherwise. We were very fortunate to receive a final set of about 1,500 plus respondents. Originally, we had more responses to the solicitation. However, after processing and cleaning the data, the number came down a little bit. What we don't know, however, is just how many, what our denominator was or what the response rate was, just simply because we don't have any ability to track just how far the survey reached. For the classification of driver groups, as I mentioned, we use the following question to categorize drivers. So we asked them, on a normal weekday, what is your primary way to get places? And of course, knowing that people would use multiple modes of transport, we asked them to pick the one that they spent the most time doing. And from that question, we were able to classify people into different road user types that you can see in this table, along with the sample size for each. I will note, however, when we analyzed the data, we did exclude the smallest of the groups. So anything, I guess in this case, anything with a sample of 10 or fewer was ultimately excluded from the analysis. So we did end up with 4 groups: drivers of a personal car or truck, someone that rode public transit, bicyclists, as well as people who predominantly walked places, so pedestrians. Now, again, I'll walk through a few of the interesting outcomes that tell a little bit of a story. And of course, the full report covers a lot more ground. So first, we were interested in whether drivers and non-drivers differed in their understanding of advanced technology. And so what we're capturing in this plot here is the responses to 17 questions that were really at a general level. So a series of questions related to adaptive cruise control and several for lane keeping assist. And what you can see from the plot is that there was some group differences, and bicyclists generally showed a greater understanding of adaptive cruise control than the other road groups. And again, with lane keeping assist, although this difference was just nominal. And also drivers showed kind of the lowest understanding of the technology. And I want to just highlight that this is just in our sample. We're not suggesting that this would generalize to bicyclists everywhere or drivers everywhere. It's just that in our current sample, this is the pattern of results. And actually, as I get into the next data points, it's actually the interplay with some of the other measures where some of the real intrigue and interest lies. I'll note as well that the overall understanding on these measures was what we would say modest at best for all of the different groups. And this is in line with some of the other outcomes we've seen with some other studies as well. Now, if we were to kind of look at the bicycle scenario and ask the question of what will the vehicle do in the bicycle scenario? So this is moving from these more general statements about the technology to what it would do in a specific situation. And so for this, having read the scenario, having seen the little schematic of the scenario and read the scenario, drivers or respondents were then asked about what they thought the vehicle would do or how the vehicle would behave in the situation. And then they would rate this on a scale of between 0 to 100. And so on the plot on the right-hand side is, it shows the different items that we asked drivers. And so, for example, we asked, how likely is it that the vehicle would just continue without making any adjustments? how likely is it the vehicle sensors would successfully detect the pedestrian, and other questions about whether the vehicle would automatically slow down, or even more sophisticated, whether it would automatically veer left to give space to the bicyclist in the scenario. Above the dashed line, the response was true, and so higher is a more successful score. Below the line, the answer was false, and so a lower score is better. And so you can see from the general patterns of the results here that, again, bicyclists had more accurate expectations about how the vehicle would behave in this specific scenario. And so this is kind of an extension of this advantage of the general knowledge that bicyclists in the current sample seem to have. I will note, however, that all of the groups were less likely to believe that one of the less believable options was true, and that's that the vehicle would automatically veer to give space to the bicyclist. Now, when you look at what people would actually do, were we to put them in the role of the bicyclist in the scenario, we did see some interesting patterns as well. So again, we told them to kind of assume the role of the bicyclist in the scenario and indicate how likely they would be to engage in a series of different actions, including no action. And so, one option was just to keep riding as they were. Others might be to move further to the right, even though they were riding on a narrow shoulder. And others might be just to kind of stop riding and kind of wait for the vehicle to pass, kind of a more deliberate safety precaution. And interestingly, we saw that bicyclists in the current sample were less likely to report changing their behavior or indicate that they would change their behavior in the scenario. So in some cases, this was just a nominal difference. Other times it was a statistically significant difference. But this was interesting when you consider some of the, their understanding of the systems as well. Next, when we ask respondents to rate their trust in the technology, or conversely, their trust in the driver, we see some interesting patterns as well. So what we had, respondents would kind of rate their trust with the technology. So they rate their trust in the technology as described in the scenario on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 being very low, 100 being very high. But we also asked them the same question to imagine the exact same scenario, but one in which the technology was not present, one in which the driver was actually, or a driver was driving the vehicle, and asked them to make the same rating. And what we've done in the plot to the right is to map the different points of view to the road user group. So in this case, drivers are rating their trust in their own driver skills as drivers in the scenario, whereas the non-drivers are rating trust in the drivers as if they were the non-driver, the bicyclist in the scenario. So it's a little bit of an apples to a different kind of apples comparison, but we thought this made some practical sense just in terms of kind of people adopting the viewpoint of the role that they were assigned. And what we can see is that generally all groups tend to trust the driver more than the technology in this situation. But it's interesting that drivers definitely have a higher degree of their own skills than other drivers or other road users trust the drivers. But it's interesting that this is magnified when you consider the difference with the technology as well. And so drivers are much more likely to trust their own skills over and above the technology than the other road users. And so again, another interesting data point here. When we ask drivers to rate their perceived crash risk with and without the technology, again, we had them rate this with the technology active as described in the scenario, and then again to envision the exact same scenario without the technology and to rate their perceived risk. We've gone ahead and mapped the points of view again. So again, drivers are rating the perceived risk as themselves as the drivers, while the non-drivers are rating the perceived risk as the bicyclist or non-occupant in the scenario. And similar to the trust profile, there was a higher perceived risk when technology was present. However, In this case, there was no significant group difference with the technology. So we're looking at the red line in the plot. And so whereas there's differences in trust ratings across the different groups, we don't see the same reflection in the risk ratings. And also we kind of highlight how there were group differences with the expectations of the technology as well. And so all of these nuances in trust and expectations of technology don't necessarily translate, at least in this item, to a difference in perceived risk. So that was quite an interesting outcome as well. The last data point I'll dwell on is kind of the outlook for the future of AV technology, and then I'll kind of tie everything together for you guys. So we did ask a series of questions about the outlook. This one item related to when people thought that the advanced vehicle technology would be able to detect bicyclists just as effectively as an alert human driver. And so in this plot, we're really just highlighting the proportion of respondents that indicated these different milestones that are in the legend of the figure there. And so lighter and green shades in the figure indicate more greater optimism about the technology. And so we can see that drivers in this sample are showing a little bit more optimism than the other groups, given the amount of green that we're seeing in their column. However, interestingly, or perhaps disturbingly, there are not insignificant numbers of people that believe the technology is already at this stage. And so we're talking about the lightest stages at the very top of the graph. And this kind of ties back to some of the other outcomes when it relates to general understanding of this new technology, and certainly with other works elsewhere. So let me just kind of go back and sort of capture some of the key points that were kind of built into those last few data slides. And so when we think about the accuracy of these systems, the understanding of the systems, that is, overall, we're seeing modest levels at best. However, in the current sample, bicyclists did seem to have an edge when it came to understanding relative to other road users, including drivers. However, interestingly, it was the bicyclists, when we were actually in the specific use case scenario, they were the ones that were least likely to report changes in their own actions, which these changes which could actually increase or enhance their safety. And so, there might be a little bit of a disconnect between, perceptions of risk or safety and intended behaviors vis-a-vis this system understanding, which I think is an important thing to probe a little bit further. We saw that non-drivers demonstrated lower trust in vehicle technology than drivers. However, groups did not differ in their appraisal of risk in the situation. And so again, there's a little bit of a disconnect between people's trust and their appraisal of risk. Not surprisingly, drivers trusted their own driving skills much more than the technology. And this was really exaggerated relative to the magnitude by which other road users trusted drivers. And so again, we see this in a lot of different facets across different studies where drivers really miscalibrated in terms of their own skills and abilities. And I think that's being reflected here as well. All groups indicated that technology increased crash risk, and this increase was, again, largest for drivers because they probably had this inflated self-confidence. And drivers were more optimistic about the progression of technologies in the future. And so the future outlook was a bit more optimistic for these compared to other road users. Now, in terms of just kind of wrapping up with some limitations and takeaways, our classification of road user is relatively simplistic. And as I mentioned at the outset, we do expect there's a lot of crossover. And so, drivers are sometimes pedestrians or sometimes bicyclists, et cetera. And so really, we're just using this as a convenient means of kind of trying to create, classifications of these individuals by the mode of transport that they use most often. And so we're really not claiming that bicyclists don't necessarily drive oftentimes. Again, as with most surveys, we're relying on self-reports. And also the use of hypothetical scenarios also raises some questions about what would people actually do in the real world in the same situations. And so there's all these things, these caveats that we have to keep in mind when looking at these sorts of data. But I think in terms of some of the key outcomes that we want to highlight and underscore here, we did identify some important differences across road user types, in terms of their expectations, their understanding, and so on. And so really this underscores for us that we really do need to understand the perspectives and understanding of new vehicle technology as well as related behaviors from all road users and not just drivers. And so we're hopeful that we can start to see a little bit more work in that space. And maybe just as importantly, if not more, we do see some important mismatches between understanding or expectations of the technology, as well as the intended behaviors or the reported intended behaviors. And so some of the pattern of results really, we could see greater risk for some of these road users, whether due to false expectations about what the technology can do, or just from a lack of compensatory behaviors that might kind of preserve safety where certain risk might exist. And so in terms of kind of alleviating some of that, it is possible that individualized or targeted approaches might be appropriate for educating different road user groups, or failing that, at least understanding and accommodating the needs of different user groups in this context. Now, I'd be remiss to sign off before kind of giving a little bit of nod to our virtual forum, which is coming up in September. You can visit our AAA Foundation website for information about this and to sign up. I will note that we do have limited space, and so it is rapidly filling up, but we will create a waiting list for other people that want to potentially attend this event virtually and contribute to the discussions. So with that, I'm going to, again, thank all of my contributors at the different universities, the collaborators. Highlight again that the full report can be found on our website or at the SaferSim website. And then I will stop and see if there are any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Very interesting work and interesting outcomes. I did actually put a direct link in the chat box to that project page where people can find the final report and the fact sheet if interested. But as Bill said, we will take this time to open it up for any questions or comments.
And I'll also add too, definitely feel free, my email's down there if you do have questions that come in online.
Great. Well, we do have a question that came in from Ryan. Could you explain why it is not true that the automated vehicle would detect the bicycle in the hypothetical scenario?
Yeah, so thanks, Ryan. So what we were trying to do is try to get the kind of reflection of the most generic system. And so what we would do is, when you look at some of the listed constraints and limitations of these systems in automobile manufacturers, owners' manuals, and things like that, the large majority of them, at least at the time, they would kind of state clearly that these systems would not detect the bicyclists, or they were not built to detect pedestrians, bicyclists, and things like that. And so it's possible there's a little bit of gray area there where maybe some of them would have that capability, but I think at the time our mindset was that most systems could not do this, and this was actually listed as a constraint within the confines of the technology.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, well, we can give it another minute or so. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. While we let potentially one or two more come in. Oh, and right as I say that, from Anuj at UMass.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Jake, so just so it gets on tape here.
yeah, regarding the dashed line signifying true versus false in one of your plots, the line wasn't exactly at 50%. Was there a nuance to the true versus false?
Yeah, actually, it was just only because that's how I could fit it in the plot, Anuj. And so the location of the line wasn't really aligned with the y-axis. It was just to try to differentiate between the different clusters of lines.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah. So Sue's asking how we recruited participants, and so a lot of the times we were actually leveraging listservs and mailing lists that we had access to. So whether at the departmental level, at the universities, or at the university levels for some, we did try also to expand the coverage by reaching out through networks and channels to kind of promote the spread of the emails as well. And so again, it's really I can't really say for certain how far it reached or where it might have had, it fell into different pockets. We do know that we did have a lot of success with mass mailings at the University of Iowa. And so within this sample, there's probably quite a few respondents from Iowa. And so there is some constraints in terms of the generalizability nationwide, I believe, for that reason.
Excellent. And I definitely don't want to cut off any questions or discussion, so we can stay here if there's any other ones. I will mention that we do have another webinar coming up on September 7th. That'll be a Tuesday, and that will feature a project from Wisconsin-Madison. Actually, the presenter will be one of the researchers involved with this project, Kelvin Santiago. So we'll be sending information about that soon. And I think I'm not seeing any other questions at this point, Bill. I know, as you mentioned, your email is listed there. We'll include that too when we send out the recording, just so it's easy to find, as well with other links to the report and the forum. So I think with that, we can end it there. Thanks again, Bill. Thanks everyone for joining.